Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. This is your channel for photography, for wildlife, and for wildlife photography. And in today's video, I got my hands on one of Nikon's newest products. This is their Z50 II crop sensor body. I'm going to tell you the good, bad, and the ugly. And you know, if you follow my channel, I give you the pros and the cons. I shoot it to you straight. And I'll even tell you if this one is for wildlife photographers right after this. Now today we're going to be talking about the Z50 II. This is Nikon's newest mirrorless body. It's a crop sensor body. It's interesting because I haven't shot a crop sensor body in several years. In fact, I think the last body I regularly used that was a crop sensor body was the D500. By the way, a remarkable body for its time. It kind of set the standard for a lot of wildlife photographers and really put Nikon on the map for wildlife photography at the time as one of the leading bodies for what it did. It was a crop sensor body, but it had really good speed and autofocus. Some of the features, by the way, which are carried over to this mirrorless body. Now, I'm going to go through the physical makeup of this real quick and show you some of the specs. I'm also going to show you some image quality and compare that to what I already own. So I own a Z6 III. This is my backup wildlife body. I own a Z9, very similar, by the way, in terms of performance to the Z8. And then I've now got my hands on this Z50 II. Now, this was a rental. This came from B&H. My partners over there allowed me to have it for a month and use it. When I do my product reviews, if you follow the channel, you know I give it to you straight all the time. I tell you the good, the bad, I'll tell you who it's for, and I'm not afraid to let you know if there's something I don't like about a product. In this case, there was several things I liked about it, but there's a few things that I don't really like. I'm gonna let you know who this is for, and specifically for my wildlife friends, I'm gonna let you know, does that work as a wildlife body? So we're gonna get into all of that now. Over on the side here, I'll put up some specifications starting with price. And I'll give the price relative to what I have on the table here. I'm going to call this $1,000. It's about $900. You put some tax on there, you're going to be at around $1,000. The Z6 III is a full frame sensor. I'll talk about that in a minute, but this is a full frame sensor coming in around $2,000. And then the Z8 or Z9 bodies, they're going to be upwards of $3,000. So $3,000 to $4,000 for that series lens. So from a cost standpoint, it's really good price relative to what else is out there. The other thing it's shared in terms of commonality with these two is that while it is a crop sensor, it uses the same processor, the X-Speed 7. Now that's Nikon's top of the line sensor. They're using it in their current flagship, the Z9. And it's sharing that technology with these much more expensive bodies. That got me thinking when I saw it on paper that this is pretty exciting. Is the autofocus going to be great? Is it going to have really high frame rate? Is it going to be able to produce the speed that these other cameras can produce in this smaller format, this crop sensor body? And I'll give you a hint. It kind of does, but there are some things that limits it as well. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. So in addition to that X-Speed sensor, this is a 21 megapixel or 20.9 megapixel camera. It's got one SD slot. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. The autofocus on this, by the way, I really, really liked. It has 209 autofocus points. To put that into perspective, this one's got 273 and this one's got just around 500 autofocus points. 209 autofocus points, by the way, is plenty of autofocus points. There aren't many, especially for a crop sensor, there aren't many applications where you're going to need more focal points than that 209. I want to talk about something that's really important to wildlife and sports photographers, and that's frames per second. Kind of going through these bodies. The Nikon Z9 will give me 20 frames per second. As well as the Z8, 20 frames per second in a RAW format. The Z6 III is going to give me 14 frames a second RAW, and then the Z50 II is going to give me 11. Now that sounds a little light in comparison, but I will tell you, my everyday frame rate as a wildlife and bird photographer is 10 frames a second. You can shoot more. So I know lots of people that shoot at 20 frames, and when I am shooting action, I do like to go up to 20 frames per second. However, my everyday portrait shooting and just kind of run-of-the-mill shooting is at 10 frames a second. So this is going to deliver that raw 11 frames per second, which is really nice. It can go higher, so you can get your frame rate up to 15, 20, or even 30 frames per second. That's going to slip into a JPEG or a compressed format, so you can't shoot raw at those higher frame rates. Relative to the others, these will actually go up to 120 in JPEG. Real quickly, I want to touch on video resolution. I didn't do a ton of video with this. I'm going to show you some still life images and how they compared. Video, I did a few. So I was interested in terms of the resolution and the quality, and I found it to be really, really good. Now, I didn't shoot this in N-Log. One of the nice features about this, and it struck me as odd that they included N-Log on this body, because to me this is a little bit more of a consumer, maybe an entry-level prosumer body. And N-Log is a little bit more of a professional editing format. So they've added that in, which is really, really nice if you need it. But my guess is most people with this particular camera body aren't necessarily shooting in N-Log. So just something to think about. It does offer you raw footage, and it does offer you 4K footage. The 4K will be at 30 frames per second. It can be extended up to 60 frames per second. When it does that, it'll slip into a crop mode. It does also offer you 120 frames per second if you like that slow motion technology. I did a video about some video specs and how I prefer to use 120 frames per second wildlife to slow it down. Check out that video if you're interested. But this will do that, but it only does it in the HD format. And that HD format is that 1080 by 1920 resolution, not 4K. I did a little bit of that. I'm going to show it to you what it looks like. I slowed this one down to about 30 frames per second. I used this camera because I knew the output of this was going to be on Instagram. I actually had to shoot it vertically, and I didn't have the ability to crop it down in post-production. Now, I do that with these cameras because they're higher resolution at 120 frames per second, and I can actually shoot it in a horizontal format and crop it in post to the resolution that I want for Instagram or social media. But with this one, you only have that limited option on 120 frames per second. I want to talk about just real quickly the physical layout. Like, what does this actually feel like and look like? By far the lightest. I mean, really, really light. In fact, for somebody my size, 6 feet, my hands maybe a little bit on the bigger side, it felt a little too small for me. I do like that they included a nice grip for it, but this really small form factor wasn't necessarily to my liking. And because I'm shooting with longer lenses as a wildlife photographer, it felt a little mismatched often. It felt really, really small on the back of my 400 2.8 lens. So little small for me, but a lot of people are weight conscious. And if you're weight conscious, this is going to be the one for you. I'll put the specs up there that just shows you the difference in weight and size relative to what I have on the table here. A couple other things about this. The dial up top, it's going to flip to video and photo just like any other camera would. It's got a dial up here, which is a little bit different than the Z6. The Z6 dial on the top has a little lockout button so you can't turn it. I really don't like the Z50 II's dial because it doesn't have that lockout feature. And you'll find that, in fact, once in the field, I actually bumped it and changed the settings by accident. So something to think about. Not a major deal for most people. I always think wildlife photographers are particularly tough on equipment. So little things like that, for me, matter more than they might for somebody else. It shares the same screen as the Z6 III, so it's going to tilt out, and then it's also going to rotate. So for content creators, somebody shooting themselves, you want to frame yourself up, you don't want an external monitor on there, really, really nice for that. And then you can also use it on the back of the camera. It's not as sturdy or robust as the Z8 and Z9 screens. Those articulating screens I find to be a little bit more rugged, but they do not have the option to flip around like this one does. So pretty standard for what Nikon is offering here on kind of this hybrid type of camera. Other than that, I want to point out one other function, because most of the other things, if you've ever owned a Nikon camera before, are going to feel pretty intuitive. It shares a slot down here for both the battery and the memory card. It's funny, when I first went out into the field, I was looking where to insert the memory card, and I'm trying to look on the sides of where it goes, and then I realized, like some of the older model Nikons, they put this one on the bottom. And that memory format is SD only. So this does not have a CF Express slot or XQD slot, which some of the higher end cameras do. So you're limited to a smaller battery. I'll talk about that in a second. And you're limited to one memory card, and that memory card is in SD. So I'm going to talk about that battery real quick. I want to show you a comparison of battery life. This was a big deal for me. As a wildlife photographer, the amount of time in the field that I can shoot without changing batteries can be important. I don't want to change a battery more than once in the field. Every time I change a battery, I might miss an opportunity. I also might have to move, grab a battery. I might disrupt what I'm shooting. So I really don't like to change batteries in the field. To give you an idea of where these stand, I'm going to put up a term called milliamperage. And this is basically the capacity of a battery. The bigger the number, the more storage it has. It's like a bucket of water. A big bucket of water holds a lot of water. These will hold more electric charges, and it can just go longer. This one rated by Nikon to do about 300 shots in the field. My personal experience, that's pretty close to what I got out in the field before it started to turn red and I had to change it. This one's going to get you more. This uses an EN-EL15 battery. I don't know if I mentioned this battery. This is an EN-EL25 series battery. This one is going to get you maybe 800 to 1,000 shots before it runs out. That will all be variable, by the way, on if you use the electronic viewfinder, if you use the back of the screen, how often you're chimping or looking at the back of your picture. So all that's going to be dependent on that. This battery is different than the other two. This is an EN-EL18 series battery. This is going to get me about 2,000 plus. So when you look at the difference between here to here, I could go about 7 times as long in the field with this Z9 camera, or the Z8 for that matter. This one I could probably go 2 to 4 times as long in the field as that Z50 II. So can be important. That battery life can be a big deal. I want to mention this because I didn't see this in anybody else's reviews. I had a tough time charging this the first couple times. It was very particular, and I didn't have this with any of my other cameras, but when I'm using the USB-C port to charge this, I found it to be a little finicky. The first couple adapters I used didn't work. It wouldn't charge it. Then it did charge it. The first time I went out in the field, it showed as fully charged, but then it went down very fast. It didn't feel like I was shooting very long at all before it was time to change the battery again. The second time I went out and I charged it again, it felt a little better. The charge seemed to take. It lasted longer in the field, but it was odd in that it turned red, indicating low battery, and then went back up to about 75%. So again, could be my copy of this. I don't know if anybody else has had problems with that, but that USB-C charging seemed to be very particular, and it seemed to need a certain requirement of either voltage or wattage that to get it powered. And if it didn't have that, it seemed to not want to power at all. I left this in overnight, the first night, by the way, to charge, and it didn't charge. So again, I had to play around, use the right adapter, and make sure that it got the right charge. So a couple of my experiences with that. I do want to talk about this one other factor in here, which is that SD card. So if you remember back when I listed the specs of these and I said they all share a very fast processor. However, this one, shooting much larger files, was able to actually have a higher frame rate. I believe that actually to be a bottleneck from the time, you have to remember, anytime we work with frame rates or data, there's always going to be a bottleneck, and the bottleneck will be the slowest point that it can perform at. And I think the bottleneck on this is probably where this SD card is, and writing to the SD card and clearing out the buffer. So I just don't think it writes as fast, and those SD cards typically don't write as fast as CF Express cards do. Now that's my best guess on this one because again, they share the same processor, but the frame rate is different, and this has the lowest frame rate available amongst what I have on the table here. Now I talked a little bit about the specs and the physical form factor, what it's like, the features of it. What we really care about is the image quality. And so to that point, I am going to show you some examples. Now, I am a firm believer in practical images. So I'm not going to shoot test charts because all of that really is going to be more dependent on the lens and the sharpness of the lens. I used a consistent lens. I did 3 different bodies, and I'm going to show you the differences. The main difference you're going to see is the scale of the image in the frame. So the subject in this first image is going to appear larger because this is on the crop sensor. I don't want to get into a side conversation on crop sensors, but just know crop sensors don't magnify the image. They only change the way that that looks on the sensor. The magnification comes from the lens. When projected onto a smaller sensor, the same size object will appear longer, and we call that a crop factor. For Nikon, it's a 1.5, so it's a really nice round number to look at. This, while shot on a 400mm lens, appears the same way it would as if it were shot on a 600mm lens on a full frame body. So that conversion, that 1.5 for Nikon, is a standard conversion from their crop sensors to their full frame, and all it means is how would it look on a full frame body? What focal length would it look like? And it would be 1.5 times bigger. It is not magnified though. I don't want to get into a subject down there. Somebody will say in the comments, oh, that's not true. It magnifies the image. The only thing that magnifies an image is the glass. The body does not magnify anything. The size of the sensor, however, is relative to the proportions that it will show. So this is going to look like a 600 millimeter on a full frame body. However, this is a 400 millimeter on Nikon's crop sensor. Now let me show you what that looks like in terms of the full frame performance. That's what a full frame sensor was going to look like. Irrespective of resolution, this is the 24 megapixel Z6 III. This is the 45 megapixel Z9. Notice the two full frame sensors look almost identical in terms of the scale, they are. And then notice the crop sensor feels tighter, it feels 50% larger, and that's just because it's projected on a smaller area. Now let's pull these up, and I'll have to switch my screen again, but I want to pull these up side by side. I'm going to zoom into 100% because I want to show you a couple things here. Okay, and now I've got all three of them up. Now what I did is I zoomed into 100%. And you'll notice all three images have a different scale. Some appear a little bit larger, some appear a little bit smaller. Has nothing to do with the crop sensor. This now we're talking about the resolution. The camera with the most detailed resolution will appear to be larger when zoomed into 100%. The camera with the lower resolution or lower pixel pitch will actually appear to be smaller. And so what you see here on the left is this is the crop sensor zoomed in at 100%. This is the Z9 on the right zoomed into 100%. And at the same time, the Z6 III, which is the lowest resolution of these three. The interesting thing that I really wanted to look at wasn't the sharpness as much as the color and the noise created from the sensor. Remember, sharpness is generally a feature of the lens. Color, noise, dynamic range, more a feature of the sensor. When I looked at these three, the best noise performance, honestly, was on the Z6 III. It has a full frame sensor, a little bit lower resolution. It is typical that you get better noise performance out of that. It's not for every camera body, but typical. And you look at the left and right, they're pretty close in terms of scale here and in terms of size. And in fact, when I cropped the Z9 down to the size of the Z50 II, they looked really close, like super, super close. So the sensor on the Z50 II felt really, really good. It's a little different than the other two. The Z9 has what they call a stacked sensor. The Z6 III has a partially stacked sensor, and this does not have any stacked sensor. That will come into play when it comes to things like blackout or even frame rate and performance. I'm not going to get too bogged down into that, but I do want you to know, while they use different sensor technologies on all three, the output, the image that's produced by that Z50 II is actually really, really good. So I had no problems with the actual image. Where it struggled a little bit was sometimes I wanted more. I wanted that full frame sensor, so I had more scene involved. And that crop sensor, I think of it as pre-cropping. It felt a little tight. Let me show you some examples now. So I showed you the image quality. You'll got to take it from me. The image quality that you're seeing right there from the Z50 II is pretty good. I'm going to show you some real life examples. So now I give you the test shots. I take it out in the field. Did not have a ton of time with this. I wish I had more time to play with this. I'm going to tell you a couple real life experiences, and then I'll tell you about the sensor and what I felt about the images produced. The first real life experience was when I was focusing on the birds, it felt really good. So that X-Speed 7 sensor, that faster processor, while it didn't produce super high frame rate, it produced really good frame rate. But what it did produce is really good auto tracking, including the addition of the bird subject tracker. So that was a big deal for me. I tested it out in the field with ducks, and here's what it started to look like. So this is an edited image, very lightly cropped. In fact, I think I only cropped it in just about 10% just to get the composition the way I wanted it. That hooded merganser was pretty close to me, but you could see it, not a lot of room in this. And that's the disadvantage of crop sensors sometimes, is when things are a little bit closer, we don't have a lot of room to work with. In fact, let me show you this. Not an edited photo here. This is straight out of the camera. I couldn't get the whole duck in all the time. So these common mergansers started floating in front of my blind. And while I was locked into the eye, you'll see I couldn't get the tail in frame. Now, do you have to have the whole bird in frame? Not always, but in this case, I would have liked to have had that. I was, however, able to get a couple shots where in that same sequence, I converted this in a different area of the lake when he floated in front of me. I did convert this to a little bit different look, a little more artistic look, but you can see here, almost no crop on this. So with that cropped sensor, it was really, really tight when these ducks were in close. Now you probably wouldn't feel that with a smaller subject, and you probably wouldn't feel that way if the subject was further away. In fact, when the subjects were in a normal distance, so not super close, this is unedited, I just grabbed a raw file to show you scale. That's about the right scale for waterfowl for me personally. So if I had shot this on a full frame sensor, I probably would have ended up cropping it down to these dimensions anyway. And this is a typical distance for ducks. They weren't really close, but maybe 40 feet away. This is the look that crop sensor gave me. I'm gonna show you a couple other comparisons because I actually did a workshop with somebody and I said, let me take the Z50 II, I'm gonna have you shoot the Z9 and we're gonna compare them next to each other. I ended up with a frame that looked like this. Now, what this was shot horizontally. I kept all of the vertical resolution and I just cropped in the sides for composition. So when shot vertically, this was as big as I could get it. This was as wide as I could get this, or as tall as I could get this. The person I was with shot this image on a Z9 and did the same thing. Shot horizontally, cropped in the sides. We both had the same vision in mind here. I did a video, by the way, called Focusing on the Sweet Spot. And when I was doing the workshop, I really made it a point to say, like, this is what we're gonna shoot. It's not gonna be front lit. It may feel wrong, especially for a beginning photographer, because you're like, I can't see the subject. It doesn't work for me. Trust me when I say, sometimes the best part of an image isn't just the subject. And look at the colors. So when you see both of these, you see similar edits. Mine might be a little bit darker. And I didn't mind this being tight because I liked the silhouette a little bit tighter. And I liked showing the hair on the back of the hood of this merganser. In this case, we are able to show more of the water and more of the glow. So depends on which style you like better. But I could not have, with that crop sensor, I could not have achieved that because I didn't have the resolution. I didn't have the full frame resolution available that the client had. So I thought that was an interesting comparison, showing you exactly two people shooting the same subject, same day, what a crop sensor is able to do versus how much more you can get out of a full frame. Also note this, when shot on a Z9, I could crop this exact image to this resolution and not lose any actual resolution. It would basically come out to be the same resolution after cropping it down. That's because the full frame sensor on the Z9 is a little bit higher in terms of megapixels, and when cropped down, it comes out to the same. If you remember that comparison I did with the three images at 100%, what that really shows is that the Z9 can be cropped quite a bit, and you still get a really nice, or you still get a lot of pixels available in the final image. One more quick story about this image. I mentioned that the frame rate was at 11 seconds, but it had some options to go up from there. And in this case, I was shooting these ducks. I wanted a little bit better frame rate, so I moved it up to 15 frames per second before I realized that the camera automatically had switched to JPEG. So the image you're looking at here, kind of a novice move on my part, was shot in JPEG, only because I didn't know the camera and I didn't realize that. So as soon as I flipped it to 15 frames per second, it automatically defaulted to JPEG. So I shot a whole day worth of JPEG images. Not the end of the world, but something I wasn't totally thrilled about. Now the next day I did go out and, or the next week I went out and I shot again. I did waterfowl again because it's March here, and in March it's a good time for waterfowl. And I was able to produce this image. This was captured in RAW. It was captured on this crop sensor. The proportions were just right. And I'll show you the before and after. I'll just kind of toggle them back and forth, and you can see what I was able to do with the file. I honestly felt like I was able to push the files very similarly to the Z9. The difference is these pre-cropped sensors, they show noise a little bit more. In other words, you're not going to want to crop it much more than what you get in camera. This one's a little over 5,000 pixels wide. If I was cropping it down, I would only crop it down to about 3, maybe 4,000 pixels. 3 would be probably the most I would crop to. With my Z9, I start at 8,000 pixels, and I can still crop it all the way down to that 3,000 or 4,000. And it's going to appear to be about the same image. My experience was, when I compared the files, really close in terms of performance, with the difference being the Z9 has that stacked sensor and a lot more resolution, and it's a full frame. So would I recommend it? Well, yes and no. I would recommend this for a generalist photographer, somebody that's maybe getting their first really good mirrorless camera. And I wouldn't steer my wildlife friends on a budget away from it, but I would put an asterisk next to this one. If you can afford a little bit better body, something a little bit more rugged, better battery life, maybe 2 SD cards or 2 combinations of memory slots, I would go that way. I also would maybe wait to see if they come out with something a little bit better in terms of construction and performance for wildlife. There's been rumors out for a Z80/Z90. It's been out for a year. I didn't look at the rumors today. They tend to float when it's coming out. What are the specs be? It is said to be similar to this, but designed more for wildlife, meaning we're probably going to get 2 memory card slots. We're probably going to get CF Express in one of those memory slots. We may get a more robust, or we likely will get a more robust body. We're almost certainly get an EL15 battery instead of the smaller battery. In terms of autofocus, I don't know what that'll look like. I expect it to be outstanding. And what is the price point? That's really the question. If the Z6 III is coming in a little over $2,000 and this one's coming in a little under $1,000, what would that price point look like? I gotta believe it's gonna be $1,500 to $2,000. Could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less, depending on the features, but I wouldn't expect it to be under $1,500. So where does that put you if you're looking for a crop sensor wildlife or body? Well, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, other than this one will work for you right now, but I wonder if you'll regret it when the other one eventually, if the other one ever comes out. So that's my thoughts around this camera. My applications for wildlife, strengths, pros, cons, everything you got on this one with some real life examples. Hope you found this review helpful. Now, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, I'm going to encourage you right now to stop, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. It lets you know when I have a new video out, and hit the like button. That like button will push the content out to like-minded individuals and give them a chance to see this product review. Hope you enjoyed this one, and as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.